My dad's in special forces. The cop let out a sharp, mocking laugh. You expect me to believe that, kid? His grip on Jamal's wrist tightened, the authority in his stance overwhelming. Red and blue lights pulsed across the quiet suburban street, casting harsh shadows over neatly trimmed lawns. Curious neighbors peeked through blinds, their whispers drowned beneath the hum of the cruiser's engine. But Jamal didn't flinch. He held his chin high, his voice steady. He's coming. Any second now. The cop scoffed. Yeah, sure he is. What the officer didn't know was this. In less than 60 seconds, that smirk would disappear. His grip would loosen, and a man would step out of the shadows, one who'd make him regret every word he just said. Jamal had heard it all before. You don't belong here. Where'd you steal that bike from? But this time was different. He was just biking home after basketball practice when the cruiser pulled up. The cop claimed he matched a suspect's description. Jamal knew the drill. Stay calm, answer questions, don't give them a reason. But when the officer laughed at the mention of his dad, something in Jamal snapped. Because his father wasn't just some guy. He was the kind of man who moved in silence until it was time not to. The cop's radio crackled as he reached for his cuffs. Let's take a ride downtown, kid. Sort this out. Jamal's stomach dropped. He knew what that meant. Then came the screech of tires. A black SUV skidded to a stop behind the cruiser. The officer spun around, hand instinctively hovering over his holster. The door swung open. Boots hit the pavement. Heavy, deliberate. A towering figure stepped out, posture rigid, eyes locked onto the scene. Jamal exhaled. Dad. Sir, this is police business, the officer barked, trying to assert control. Your business is harassing my son? The man's voice was calm but carried the weight of a coming storm. The cop's partner moved in quickly, sensing the tension. We had a report of a stolen bike. The kid fit the description. Jamal's father didn't even blink. Description? He pulled out his military ID and held it up. You want to run mine too? The cop paled. The insignia, the rank. Suddenly this wasn't a joke anymore. For a long second, the whole street went silent. The officer swallowed. Look, we were just what? Jamal's dad stepped closer. Teaching my son how the world sees him. Jamal felt his chest tighten. He hated this. The stares, the tension, the way his dad's jaw clenched like it was holding back a war. The officer raised a hand, suddenly unsure. No need for this to escalate. You're right, his father said, voice like ice. So uncuff my son, now. A beat passed. Then reluctantly, the officer complied. As the patrol car pulled away, Jamal finally let go of the breath he'd been holding. His father placed a steady hand on his back. You okay? Jamal nodded, but his voice was quiet. Why is it always like this? His father didn't answer right away, then softly, because some people need proof before they give you respect. But you don't owe them that. The streetlights flickered as they walked away, the night slowly swallowing the echoes of confrontation. And for the first time, Jamal understood. His father's strength wasn't just in the uniform or the title, it was in how he stood calm, unbroken, even when the world doubted him. The sun was setting behind the rooftops, casting a soft golden haze over the neighborhood. Sprinklers ticked in neat front lawns. Birds chirped their last songs of the day, and the streets were mostly quiet, except for the steady rhythm of Jamal's bike tires hitting the pavement. He had just finished basketball practice. His gym shorts clung to his legs, and the ball tied to his handlebars thumped gently as he rode. Sweat had dried on his neck, and his earbuds played a mellow beat that matched his mood. Tired, but peaceful. He was just 3 turns from home. Then he heard it. A short chirp from behind. Quick, clipped, unmistakable. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the red and blue lights flash from a patrol car pulling up behind him. He sighed and pulled over, coasting to a stop near the sidewalk. He took out his earbuds slowly, carefully. The car door opened with a thud. A white officer stepped out. Broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses still on, even though the sun was dipping below the horizon. His face was unreadable. Off the bike, the officer said, already moving closer. Jamal blinked. Excuse me? You match a description. We had a report about a stolen bike. Jamal's stomach nodded, but he kept his voice level. This is my bike. I was just at practice. The high school gym, about 10 minutes that way. The officer didn't stop. And I'm sure you have a receipt for it in your pocket, huh? Jamal shook his head slightly. No, sir, but nothing. Step off now. Jamal complied, setting the kickstand and holding up his hands a little to show he wasn't resisting. He'd been taught this. Keep your voice calm. Don't move too fast. Don't give them a reason. Hands out, the officer ordered. He gripped Jamal's wrist, turning it roughly. Sir, Jamal said, trying to make eye contact, I live here. I'm not a thief. My dad's in the military. Special forces. That made the officer pause, but only for a second. Then came the laugh. It was sharp, cold, dismissive. You expect me to believe that, kid? He tightened his grip. Special forces? What are you, 12? I'm 15, Jamal said, jaw tight. And yeah, I do. When the cop shook his head and reached toward his belt, fingers brushing against his cuffs. Let's take a ride downtown. We'll sort it out there. Jamal's pulse spiked. He knew what that meant. Even if he hadn't done anything, going to the station wasn't safe. He'd seen how fast things could spiral. Then, tires screeched. A deep growl of an engine roared behind the cruiser. A black SUV slid to a stop, its headlights flashing like a warning. The cop spun around, one hand hovering near his holster. The SUV door opened. Boots hit the ground, heavy, deliberate. Out stepped a man, broad, muscled, face calm but hard as stone. He wore civilian clothes, but everything about his stance screamed military. His eyes locked on Jamal, then on the officer. Sir, this is police business, the cop said quickly, posture stiffening. The man didn't blink. Your business, he said, voice low and firm, is putting your hands on my son. Jamal's day had started like any other. The buzz of the alarm clock yanked him from a dream he couldn't quite remember. His mom's voice echoed from downstairs, calling him to get up for school, but it was his dad who had always been the first to talk to him on mornings like this. Up, son? His father would ask, a steady presence at the foot of the bed. His voice was deep, smooth, with that touch of authority that only came from years of discipline and experience. Yeah, just a minute, Jamal would mumble, rubbing sleep out of his eyes. His dad didn't rush him. He knew Jamal well enough to give him time to get moving. But there was always that quiet pressure. Just the understanding that when Dad was around, things got done. And Jamal respected that. After breakfast, he'd walk to school, earbuds in, his feet moving faster than his thoughts. He didn't mind the walk, though it gave him time to think about everything and nothing. But most of all, Jamal thought about basketball. The only time he felt truly free was when he was on the court, dribbling, shooting, running, when he could leave all the other stuff behind. His dad wasn't much for basketball. He never understood why Jamal spent so much time with a ball instead of with weights or running drills. But that was part of who Jamal was. His father had served his country, been part of a world where physical prowess mattered in ways Jamal couldn't always grasp. But when his dad talked about his military life, Jamal listened. Your mind is your weapon, his dad would say, no matter what the topic was. Not just your body, your strength starts there. His father's eyes would grow distant when he said it, as if remembering something or someone far away. But then his gaze would return to Jamal, sharp as ever. Stay focused, he'd add, the smile there barely lifting the corners of his mouth. And don't forget where you come from. Jamal would nod, not fully understanding the weight of the words, but knowing they meant something deeper than his dad ever let on. It wasn't just his father's words, though. It was the presence. His dad was a man who commanded the room, whether he spoke or stayed silent. The house always felt different when he was home, like an invisible shield surrounded their family, keeping everything that didn't belong out. It wasn't just about being tough, it was about being unbreakable. And there, in the quiet of his room or at the breakfast table, Jamal sometimes felt that sense of invincibility, the belief that his father was untouchable, that he too could be untouchable if he followed those quiet rules his father lived by. On the basketball court, Jamal played with that same determination. He didn't look for praise, didn't ask for attention. He just moved, dribbled, shot, ran. He let his actions speak louder than any words. But today, that calm confidence, That unspoken belief in being seen and respected would be tested. As the final buzzer rang at practice, Jamal threw his gym bag over his shoulder, ready to make the short ride home. It was just a normal day, just another ride down these familiar streets. He didn't expect anything different. He hadn't heard the sirens coming. The hum of Jamal's bike wheels was the only sound. The street ahead calm and predictable. His neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. People were finishing their workday, preparing dinner, or just sitting on their front porches. The sun had dropped a little lower in the sky, casting an amber glow over the rows of houses. He could already taste the cold drink waiting for him at home, the comfort of the evening routine ahead. That's when he heard it. Again, the low rumble of an engine, but this time it didn't fade away. It grew louder. A second passed, then a third, and suddenly Jamal felt his heart race. There it was, sirens cutting through the stillness, fast approaching. His grip on the handlebars tightened. He checked over his shoulder instinctively, his stomach sinking when he saw the police car closing in behind him. The patrol car slid to a stop just behind him, red and blue lights flashing across the street like a warning. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. He had hoped for nothing more than a quiet ride home. But now the cold dread of the situation crept in. The officer didn't wait long. He was out of the car in an instant, his boots hitting the asphalt with a thud. Jamal instinctively stood still, holding his bike steady, but his pulse quickened. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Why did it always feel like they were looking for a reason to start something? "You off the bike," the officer barked, his tone sharp and commanding. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, but he didn't move. "What's this about?" "You match the description," the officer said, already moving toward him. "We got a report about a stolen bike, and you look like the guy we're looking for." Jamal frowned, confused. He was only riding home from practice. He wasn't a thief. He had no idea who they were talking about. "I don't know what you mean. I was at practice. The high school gym's just down the road." But the officer wasn't listening. His eyes didn't seem interested in the explanation. He just stepped closer, towering over Jamal. "Yeah, well, you're not going anywhere until we figure this out. Step off the bike, now." Jamal did as he was told, slowly placing his feet on the ground, trying not to show the frustration building inside. His dad had taught him not to resist. The key was to stay calm, but it wasn't easy when the officer's hand hovered near his belt, just an inch from the cuffs. "My dad's in Special Forces," Jamal said, voice firm. "He'll be here soon. You can call him if you want." The words fell flat. The officer raised an eyebrow and let out a short, mocking laugh. He leaned down closer, eyes narrowing. "Special Forces? Kid, you expect me to believe that?" Jamal stood his ground, but the officer's grip tightened around his wrist, pulling him toward the back of the patrol car. The tension in the air thickened, as if the entire neighborhood held its breath. Jamal's stomach twisted, the familiar feeling of injustice creeping in. His father had told him over and over that people wouldn't believe him just because of his skin. He had to show them who he was. But right now, that wasn't enough. The officer wasn't listening. He didn't care. Then, screech! A sudden noise broke through the tension, tires grinding to a halt behind the patrol car. Jamal didn't have time to process it. A heavy thud followed, the unmistakable sound of boots striking pavement. The officer turned, his hand still hovering near his holster, eyes darting to the dark SUV that had skidded to a stop. The door slammed open with a force that made Jamal's heart skip. And there he was, his dad. Jamal's breath caught. He didn't have to look twice to know who it was. The figure emerging from the SUV was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with military precision in every movement. His dad stood there, posture rigid, eyes locked on the situation unfolding. The officer froze, hand still at his belt. "Sir, this is police business," the officer began, but his voice faltered. "Your business," Jamal's dad said, his voice low, smooth, but carrying the weight of someone who had seen far worse than this, "is harassing my son." Jamal stood there, unsure if he should feel relief or dread. The cop's expression shifted, nervous, uncertain, as Jamal's father approached, his military ID flashing in the officer's face. "You want to run mine too?" his father asked, not a hint of humor in his voice. The officer's face paled. He hesitated. His partner, seeing the shift in the mood, took a step forward. tempting to salvage the situation. "We had a report of a stolen bike," the partner said quickly. "The kid fits the description." Jamal's father didn't blink. He held the ID up higher. "Description, you want to check mine too?" The air seemed to freeze, the whole neighborhood quiet. Jamal could see the fear in the officers' eyes as they realized who they were dealing with. The insignia, the rank. This wasn't some random civilian. This was a man who commanded respect, who'd earned it in ways they couldn't comprehend. The officer swallowed hard, his voice now shaking. "Look, we were just—" "Just what?" Jamal's dad interrupted, stepping forward with a calm, controlled menace. "Teaching my son another lesson about how the world sees him?" Jamal's heart tightened. He hated this. Hated the way the officer's words felt like accusations, the way his father's jaw clenched like he was holding back a storm. It wasn't right, but then the officer raised his hand in a half-hearted attempt to de-escalate. "No need for this to escalate. We'll let it go." Jamal's father didn't look at him. His eyes never left the officer. "Then uncuff my son." There was a moment of silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, with stiff fingers, the officer complied. The click of the cuffs being undone was the loudest sound Jamal had ever heard. The tension that had gripped him since the moment the officer stopped him slowly started to melt away. The patrol car pulled away, the officers retreating, their faces now etched with the understanding that Jamal's dad wasn't a man they could simply ignore. Jamal exhaled, his shoulders sagging. His dad placed a firm hand on his back, steady and reassuring. "You okay?" his dad asked, his voice softer than it had been moments before. Jamal nodded, but there was a question, one that had been bubbling inside him for a while. "Why is it always like this?" His father didn't answer right away. Instead, they stood there for a moment, the last of the day's light fading into darkness. Then his father spoke, the words simple but heavy with meaning, "Because some people need proof before they respect you. But you don't owe them that." The streetlights flickered on as they began to walk home. The neighborhood had gone silent, the echoes of the confrontation swallowed by the night. And for the first time, Jamal understood something he hadn't before. His father's strength wasn't just in his rank. It was in the way he stood tall, unbroken, no matter who doubted him. The walk home felt longer than it should have. Jamal's legs were tired from basketball practice, his heart still racing from the encounter with the cops. But the weight of what had just happened hung over him like a cloud he couldn't shake. The neighborhood had quieted down, the hum of streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. His dad's footsteps were steady beside him, but Jamal could hear the soft tension in his breathing. He knew his father wasn't angry with him, not really, but something about the way the officer had treated him, the way they both seemed to dismiss him without a second thought, still aided him. His dad was strong. He always had been. But tonight, Jamal saw a different side of him, one that was maybe even more powerful. It wasn't just the rank, the training, or the stories of distant battlefields. It was the way he commanded respect without asking for it, without needing to prove anything to anyone. It was the quiet strength that said, "I belong here." The two of them walked in silence for a few more steps. Then finally, Jamal couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dad," he said, his voice soft but firm, "why do people do that? Why do they treat us like that? Like we're just not supposed to be here?" His father's pace didn't change, but Jamal could feel him take a deep breath before answering. "Because some people don't see what they don't want to see," his father said, his voice low, almost like a warning. "They judge you based on what's outside, your color, your age, your background. They don't see your heart. They don't see the work, the strength, the blood you've poured into getting where you are. They don't see what matters." Jamal glanced up at him. His dad's face was hard to read in the dim light, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. Jamal wondered if his father had seen this before, if he had felt this sting more times than he was letting on. "But you didn't let them get to you," Jamal said quietly, "even when they didn't believe you." His dad's lips curled into a slight smile. "That's because I know who I am, and I know who you are too. That's what keeps me going. No one can take that from you, Jamal, no matter how many times they try." Jamal felt a weight lift from his chest. For the first time that evening, he felt a little lighter. He had always looked up to his father, but now there was something deeper there, a sense of understanding, a shared bond that went beyond the simple acts of protection and guidance. They reached their street, the house at the end of it, standing quiet and solid, just like his father. Jamal wasn't sure if the world would ever truly change for people like him, but his father's words echoed in his mind. Some people need proof before they respect you, but you don't owe them that. They stood at the doorstep for a moment, Jamal looking up at his dad, who gave him a nod that felt like everything was going to be all right. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, his father said. Not ever. Jamal smiled, feeling the weight of the day finally settle. Thanks, Dad. His dad's eyes softened for just a moment. I'm proud of you, son. Never forget that. And with that, the door opened, and the noise of the house, his mom's laughter, the faint hum of the TV, the smell of dinner cooking, welcomed them in. As they walked inside, Jamal realized something. Respect wasn't something you could demand with words. It wasn't given just because of your background, your uniform, or your rank. It wasn't even about proving yourself over and over again. Respect was about standing tall, no matter who doubted you. It was about being unshakable in your own truth, even when others couldn't see it. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about earning respect from others. Maybe it was about giving respect to yourself first. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Jamal woke up to the same morning rituals, his mom's voice from the kitchen, the smell of bacon and eggs filling the house, the soft clink of dish as she prepared breakfast. He would grab his bag, give his dad a quick nod of goodbye, and head out the door to school. The weight of the previous night's encounter with the cops still hung in the back of his mind, but he tried not to let it show. There were basketball games to think about, homework to finish, and his friends to hang out with. But some nights were different. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the city settled into the rhythm of night, Jamal's mind would drift back to that moment. The way the officer had looked at him like he was less than. The way his dad had stepped in without hesitation. And even though everything had turned out okay in the end, there was a feeling he couldn't shake, a hollow ache, a quiet realization that nothing had truly changed. That was the weight of silence. It wasn't about the confrontation, the anger, or the argument. It was the unspoken understanding that this kind of thing happened every day. It wasn't the first time Jamal had been stopped for no reason, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. The cops' actions, their doubts, their questions, they didn't feel like isolated incidents. They were a part of a much larger, quieter system that would continue to look at him differently because of the color of his skin. That night, after dinner, Jamal found himself in his room, the lights dimmed, the window cracked just enough for a cool breeze to filter in. He stared at his basketball, spinning it slowly in his hands, his thoughts wandering as they always did. It was hard to talk about. His friends didn't really get it, not in the way he did. They couldn't understand what it felt like to be judged by the color of your skin, to be treated like you didn't belong. Even his mom, who was always there for him, never really talked about it much. She worked hard, kept her head down, and did what she had to do to provide for them. She didn't like talking about the unfairness of the world because it was something she had learned to accept. But Jamal couldn't accept it. Not anymore. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from one of his friends, Trey. You good, man? Heard about what happened with the cops the other night. You okay? Jamal stared at the screen for a moment. He appreciated the message, but it wasn't enough. Trey, along with most of his friends, had grown up in a different world. A world where they didn't have to worry about things like this. A world where the police were there to protect, not to question. He typed a quick reply. I'm good. Just tired, you know? Jamal threw the phone aside and leaned back against the wall. It wasn't true. He wasn't just tired, he was worn out. Worn out from the constant need to prove himself, from the silent battles that no one saw but him. And more than that, he was tired of the silence that came after the battles. The quiet moments when everyone expected him to move on, to forget, to act like it was just another day. But it wasn't just another day. It was another reminder that the world saw him differently, that he had to fight for every inch of space he was given. He glanced at the clock. It was getting late, but sleep wasn't coming easily tonight. His mind kept turning over what his dad had said. You don't owe them anything. Jamal wasn't sure if he completely understood it yet, but he was starting to. His dad didn't have to fight the system. He had fought bigger battles, real battles. What his dad had taught him, by simply being who he was, was something deeper. It was about holding on to your sense of self, even when the world wanted to take it from you. Jamal's fingers tightened around the basketball. Maybe it wasn't about trying to change everything all at once. Maybe it was about knowing that every day, no matter how small, was a chance to show who he was, to stand firm in his truth. He sighed, glancing at the window again. The cool night air brushed against his skin, and for a brief moment, he felt something like peace settle in his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he didn't have to face it alone. As he lay down, the weight of silence still lingered, but now he didn't mind it as much. It was his silence, his space, his truth, and for the first time that felt enough. The next few weeks passed with a strange sort of rhythm. Jamal had learned to walk a little taller, to breathe a little easier, even when the world felt heavy. School was the same, his friends were the same, and his dad's quiet strength had become a comforting presence in his life, like a steady anchor that kept him grounded no matter how stormy things got. But there were days like today when the weight of everything he was trying to ignore, came crashing back down on him. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when it happened. Jamal was walking home from school, headphones in, mind lost in the rhythm of the music, when he saw them. Two police officers standing by the side of the road near a store, chatting idly. He wasn't sure why he felt his heart skip a beat. Maybe it was just the lingering tension from the last encounter, the feeling that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Or maybe it was because he knew that sometimes people looked at him and saw something they didn't like. His feet slowed, but he kept walking, keeping his head down, doing his best to blend in. He wasn't in the mood for confrontation. He didn't want to be noticed. He didn't want to feel like he was on trial for something he hadn't done. But as he passed by the officers, one of them turned, and for a split second, their eyes locked. The officer's gaze was cold, assessing. Jamal's heart raced as the officer took a step forward, his eyes scanning him up and down. "Hey, you, stop," the officer called, his voice sharp, demanding. Jamal froze. The world felt like it had stopped moving around him, his pulse pounding in his ears. The officer wasn't yelling, he wasn't aggressive, but there was something in his tone that made Jamal's stomach twist. He pulled his headphones out and turned slowly to face the officer. "What's going on, officer?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step toward Jamal, eyes still fixed on him like he was trying to make a judgment call. Jamal stood there, not moving, waiting for the inevitable. He could feel his dad's words in his mind. "Don't back down, stand tall." But even as he reminded himself of those words, something inside him was afraid. Afraid of what this moment could turn into. "I'm just trying to get home, officer," Jamal said, his voice calm, but he couldn't hide the edge of uncertainty that slipped in. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Just making sure you're not up to anything. You know how it is around here, shy." Jamal's breath hitched for a second, the familiar sting of being judged washing over him. The officer hadn't even asked him what he was doing. It wasn't about the bike, the basketball practice, or anything that actually made sense. It was about something else, something Jamal couldn't put into words. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, another voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here, officer?" It was his dad. Jamal's heart skipped a beat as he turned to see him standing there. The same unwavering posture, the same quiet authority that always made everything feel like it was under control. The officer looked up, surprised to see Jamal's father standing there, his military ID hanging from his pocket, a faint glint of recognition flashing across the officer's face. "No problem, sir," the officer said quickly, his voice shifting, almost apologetic. "Just a routine check. We're just making sure everything's in order." Jamal's dad didn't flinch. He didn't react to the sudden shift in the officer's tone. He simply stood there, his presence solid, unwavering. "Jamal is fine," his father said, his voice calm but firm. "He's just heading home from school." The officer nodded, but Jamal could see the unease in his eyes. His dad's presence had done what words alone couldn't. It had shifted the balance, made the situation change, without a single shout, without a single threat. Jamal stood still, feeling something he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just relief, it wasn't just gratitude. It was something more profound, something that he hadn't fully realized until this very moment. Strength wasn't about how loud you could be or how quickly you could react. It wasn't about pushing people back or asserting dominance. Strength was about control, about standing firm without moving a muscle, about being so grounded in who you were that the world couldn't knock you down. His dad wasn't just strong because of his rank, his skills, or his career. He was strong because he knew who he was, and he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Not the officer, not the world. His father was the embodiment of quiet strength, the kind of strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. The officer nodded again, then turned and walked back to his partner, leaving Jamal and his dad standing there, the tension slowly dissipating. Jamal watched the officers drive away, their patrol car disappearing down the street. He turned to his father, feeling something shift inside him. "You didn't have to do that," Jamal said quietly, the weight of everything slowly lifting from his shoulders. His dad smiled, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, I did. But you don't have to do it the way I do. You'll find your own way to be strong. And when the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do." Jamal nodded, the quiet understanding settling in his chest. He didn't know what the future held or what kind of man he was going to become, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to carry that strength with him in his own way for the rest of his life.